Imagine standing in the marble foyer of your own home only to be told by your late husband, relatives that you have no right to be there, that the estate you built together, worth over $8 million, should be handed over to them. Now imagine the silence that followed when I calmly reminded them of his final safeguard, the sanity clause. It hadn't always been this way. When I first met Richard, nearly 25 years ago, I was a school teacher with little more than a modest apartment and a pile of student loan debt. He was a businessman with silver hair, sharp wit, and a reputation for being brilliant yet eccentric. I never could be tolerated me at first, but he had a way of looking at me as if I were the only steady thing in his otherwise unpredictable world, and that mattered far more than bank accounts or stock portfolios. We married after 3 years of courtship. Richard had 2 siblings, a brother named Daniel and a sister named Eleanor, both of whom seemed charming on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of envy that I could feel like static in the air. They hid it behind forced smiles and elaborate toasts, but I saw the glances they exchanged when Richard and I announced our engagement. They believed I was after his fortune, and no amount of proof my continued work as a teacher, our modest wedding, the way Richard and I traveled light, preferring road trips to luxury cruises ever, changed their minds. Do you really think she'd still be here if you weren't worth millions? I once overheard Eleanor whisper to Daniel at a family gathering. I heard that. I told her sharply. She turned, feigning innocence. Oh, dear. I only meant that Richard deserves someone who loves him for who he is, she said with that honey sweet venom only certain types of women could master. Richard laughed it off, pulling me close. Let them think what they will, he whispered against my ear. We know the truth. Still, those words lingered like poison. They were small barbs at first, harmless seeming, until Richard fell ill. His diagnosis came swiftly: pancreatic cancer, and the prognosis was grim. The siblings who had always lingered in the background suddenly surged forward, calling daily, dropping by unannounced, hovering in hospital corridors with exaggerated concern. Don't you worry, Richie, Daniel said one afternoon, clapping his frail brother on the shoulder. We'll take care of everything once. Well, you know, Richard's eyes flicked to mine. He squeezed my hand beneath the hospital blanket, his grip weak but urgent. Everything is already taken care of, he replied firmly. It was in those final months that he spoke to me about the clause. His estate plan was extensive layered trusts, charitable foundations, protective measures upon protective measures. Richard was a meticulous man, and he left nothing to chance. But the centerpiece of it all was something he had devised years earlier, after a long battle with his siblings over a smaller inheritance from their parents. He called it the Sanity clause. You know how they are, darling, he told me one night, his voice thin but his eyes still alight with mischief. They'll come for what isn't theirs. They'll claw, bite, and smear your name if they think it means they can touch my fortune. But I know them better than they know themselves. That's why I built the trap. I frowned, brushing a damp cloth across his forehead. A trap? Yes, he said, smiling faintly. If they contest my will, if they attempt to seize even a sliver of what I've left you, the clause activates. They forfeit everything. Not inheritance from me, but trust as well. Every safety net, every dime, gone. All rooted into the foundation. It forced the choice: accept what you've given, lose it all. I remember staring at him, half in awe, half in disbelief. You don't think they'll risk it, do you? Oh, I know them, he said, a cough rattling his chest. They won't be able to resist. Greed blinds them. That is why it is called the Sanity Closet Test, whether they can be sane enough to accept what they re-given. If not, they're finished. When Richard passed away, the estate transitioned smoothly at first. I received the house, the majority of his assets, and control of the family foundation. Daniel and Eleanor received a generous sum each, far more than most people see in a lifetime. But it wasn't enough. It never is it? The first sign of trouble came when I received a notice from their attorney, a man named Lowell, who specialized in high-profile inheritance disputes. The letter was filled with thinly veiled accusations, undue influence, questions of competency, claims that I had manipulated Richard in his final days. I felt my hands shake as I read it. For a moment, I wondered if you'd been wrong if they would, in fact, be cunning enough to hold back. But then I remembered his words. Greed blinds them. Into what? I asked, feigning ignorance. She smiled. The sanity clause. He told me all about it before he died. Your husband was very clear. Contesting the will triggers the clause, and everything they were supposed to receive is diverted into the foundation. It's airtight. They've just disinherited themselves. I sat back, stunned. Richard had been right. They couldn't help themselves. The court proceedings were brutal. Daniel stormed through the courthouse halls like a man on a mission, his voice carrying down the corridors. She's a gold digger? He bellowed once, pointing at me as if I weren't even present. She preyed on him when he was vulnerable. Eleanor was more composed, but her venom ran deeper. She took the stand and painted me as manipulative, claiming I had isolated Richard from his family. You expect us to believe, she said coldly, glaring at me across the courtroom, that our brother, in his final days, made rational decisions without our input. That's absurd. The judge's face remained neutral. But when Ms. Patel presented the documentation of the clause signed years before Richard's illness, the room shifted. Eleanor's smug expression faltered, Daniel's jaw tightened, and Lowell shuffled his papers with visible unease. So let me understand this correctly, the judge said, peering over his glasses. By contesting the will, the petitioners have activated the forfeiture clause. That is correct, Your Honor, Ms. Patel replied smoothly. Silence followed. The kind of silence that tastes of finality. Eleanor broke first. That can't be legal, she hissed. Oh, it's legal, Ms. Patel assured her. It's brilliant. I'll never forget the look on their faces when the ruling came down. Not only had they lost their challenge, but the millions they had been guaranteed were stripped from them and funneled into the charitable foundation in Richard S.'s name. They walked out with nothing, and I remained in the marble foyer of my home alone, but unbroken. Knowing that my husband's final gift to me wasn't just the estate, it was the vindication of our love against the greed that had always shadowed us. But the story didn't end there, because people like Daniel and Eleanor don't fade quietly. They simmer, they plot, and they wait for cracks to appear. And soon, whispers began reaching me that they weren't finished, that they would find another way to strike. Sanity clause be damned. They began their retaliation in whispers. At first, it was rumors in the country club, circuit claims that I had coerced Richard into rewriting his will, that I had seduced him for his money and poisoned his mind against his family. I ignored them, but the venom seeped into places I couldn't reach. Longtime acquaintances stopped inviting me to gatherings. I caught neighbors watching me from behind curtains. The charity events I hosted in Richard's name once met with warmth, now hummed with unspoken suspicion. They're trying to isolate you, Ms. Patel warned during one of our meetings. She had grown sharper since the trial, her eyes quick to catch the edges of threats I still wanted to believe were idle. It's the same tactic they accused you of. Irony is their favorite weapon. I sighed. Staring at the papers, she slid across her desk. Yet another. C. Sanders is drafted for Eleanor Eslander. Do you think they'll ever stop? No, she said bluntly. But the law is on your side. Just remember, they're desperate now. Desperate people make mistakes. She was right. Their desperation soon escalated from whispers to calculated strikes. One morning, I woke to the screech of tires outside the estate. When I rushed to the gates, I saw spray-painted words dripping in red across the wrought iron. Asterisk gold-digging widow. Asterisk, I felt my stomach twist, not from the insult itself, but from the realization that Daniel and Eleanor had crossed from courtroom battles into psychological warfare. The estate staff began to quit, one by one, frightened by the harassment. Delivery trucks mysteriously failed to arrive. I even caught a man with a camera crouched in the hedges, snapping pictures of me through the windows like I was some criminal hiding evidence. I confronted them once against Ms. Patel's advice. It was at a charity gala hosted downtown, the kind of affair dripping with champagne and diamond necklaces. They hadn't been invited, but they came anyway, as if to stake their claim in Richard's world. Daniel spotted me first. His grin was wolfish. Enjoying your blood money, sweetheart? I froze, every eye in the room subtly angling toward us. I wanted to walk away, to hold my dignity, but Eleanor's next words cut through the hum of conversation like a blade. You can hide behind that clause forever, but people are beginning to see you for what you are. And when the truth comes out, no judge will be able to protect you. My hand trembled around the stem of my glass. The truth has already come out, I said quietly. And it destroyed you, not me. Eleanor leaned close enough that I could smell her perfume cloying, suffocating. Don't get comfortable. We're not finished. It wasn't just a threat. Within weeks, they filed a new lawsuit this time, not against the will itself, but against *me*. Fraud, mismanagement of the foundation, misuse of estate funds. The accusations were laughable, but they knew what they were doing. They wanted to drown me in litigation, to bleed me dry until even the $8 million estate felt like a cage rather than a sanctuary. Ms. Patel fought like a lioness. She dismantled their claims one by one, exposing inconsistencies, showing receipts, proving beyond doubt that the foundation was thriving under my stewardship. Still, every court date left me drained, every headline in the local paper another scar. But then something happened that shifted the tide. On evening, as I was sifting through Richard S. Old files in the study searching for anything that might reinforce our defense, I stumbled upon a folder I hadn't seen before. Inside were letters, meticulously dated and signed. Letters Richard had written to his attorney years before his illness, detailing his siblings' financial recklessness, their history of manipulation, and his fear that they would someday try to undermine me. At the end of one particularly damning letter, he had written, "If they ever pursue her, know that my intentions were never clouded. She was my anchor. They were my storm. Tears blurred my vision." This was more than evidence. It was Richard's voice, echoing across time, shielding me still. When we presented the letters in court, Daniel lost control. He leapt from his chair, shouting he was insane. He didn't know what he was saying. The judge banged his gavel, demanding order. Miss Patel leaned in, her voice calm but cutting. And there it is again, the irony. They cannot even comprehend sanity, let alone respect it. The case collapsed soon after. Not only were their accusations dismissed, but the judge ordered Daniel and Eleanor to pay my legal fees. Their wealth, already thinned by the clause, was now in shambles. And yet, as I sat in the quiet of the marble foyer that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Because money is one thing, but envy never dies. I caught a flicker of movement outside the window, a shadow retreating into the hedges where the cameraman had once lurked. My heart stilled. They were still waiting an Had he left more than just the sanity clause to protect me? Or had his foresight only delayed the inevitable storm that Daniel and Eleanor were willing to unleash? Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every creak of the house sounded like an intruder, every shadow beyond the French windows like a figure waiting to pounce. I found myself patrolling the estate at night, flashlight in hand, heart thudding against my ribs as I checked the locks again and again. One night, I heard the faint crunch of gravel outside my bedroom window. I froze, the beam of my flashlight trembling across the wall, then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as if someone wanted me to hear them. By the time I reached the window and flung it open, there was nothing but silence and the distant hum of cicadas. The next morning, Miss Patel arrived with papers. "You need security," she said firmly, sliding them across the table. "I've already spoken to a firm. They'll install cameras, motion lights, even guards if necessary." I bristled. "I won't live like a prisoner in my own home." Her gaze softened, but her voice stayed firm. "You're not a prisoner. You're a target." "There's a difference." Reluctantly, I agreed. A week. He's outfitted with cameras every angle, the iron gates fitted with digital locks, the perimeter lined with floodlights. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. But the sense of being hunted didn't fade, it only shifted, like a predator circling just out of sight. The first real sign of escalation came in the form of a letter slipped under the front door. No postage. No envelope, just a folded piece of paper with 5 words scrawled in blocky handwriting. Sanity is a fragile thing. I called Ms. Patel immediately. She came at once, holding the paper delicately between gloved fingers. This is harassment, she muttered. But more than that, it's psychological warfare. They're trying to break you. I wanted to laugh, but it came out bitter. Do they think I haven't already been broken? Richard is gone. Nothing they do can touch that wound. She looked at me with something, almost like pity. That's what makes you stronger than them. But strength doesn't mean immunity. Promise me, you'll be careful. Weeks passed. The estate grew quieter, but the tension lingered, like the air before a storm. Then came the night when I found Eleanor, herself at my gates. I saw her through the cameras, first standing in the floodlight. Her silk scarf fluttering in the breeze, her expression a perfect mask of calm. She buzzed the intercom. Open the gate. Darling, she said sweetly, as if we were friends meeting for tea. My finger hovered over the speaker button, rage and disbelief tangling inside me. You have no business here, I finally said. Her smile didn't waver. I came to make peace. We're family, after all. Family doesn't terrorize each other. I snapped. Richard would have wanted us together, she said, tilting her head just so, like a snake measuring the distance to strike. He always hated conflict. The audacity made me laugh outright. Richard built an entire clause to protect me from *U**. Don't you dare stand there and pretend otherwise. For the first time, her mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed and her voice hardened. Enjoy the estate while you can. Money runs out. Lawyers grow tired. But family never stops. She turned on her heel and vanished into the night, leaving the echo of her words behind like smoke. I didn't tell Miss Patel about the visit right away. I wasn't sure why, maybe because part of me wanted to see how far they'd go without the safety net of courtrooms and lawyers. Maybe because some twisted part of me wanted to face them, myself, without the buffer of legality. But Richard's words haunted me. They won't be able to resist. Greed blinds them. Was this still greed, or had it curdled into something darker? A few nights later, I got my answer. The security cameras picked up to figures moving across the lawn, one tall, broad-shouldered, the other slimmer, slinking behind him. Daniel and Eleanor, bold as ever, testing the gates. They didn't know that Richard had thought of this too, that his paranoia had extended beyond lawyers and clauses. Because as the gates rattled under their hands, a siren erupted, blinding floodlights flared to life. And a pre-recorded Richard's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing across the night air. Greed has no home here. Leave or lose everything. They froze, their faces pale in the light, before bolting into the shadows like cornered animals. I sank to my knees inside the foyer, trembling. My husband had planned for this moment, even from beyond the grave. His sanity clause wasn't just legal, it was personal. But as the echoes of his voice faded, a terrible thought rooted itself in my mind. If Richard had gone this far to protect me, what had he seen in them that I hadn't yet faced? And more importantly, what if his preparations had only bought me time and not safety? The morning after the sirens, I found myself lingering in Richard's study, the room where he had always drafted his meticulous plans. Dust motes swirled in shafts of light cutting through the heavy curtains, and the faint scent of his cologne still clung to the leather of his chair. I sat there for hours, rifling through drawers I hadn't dared open since his death. That was when I discovered a false panel in the bottom of the desk. Beneath it, a small black lockbox waited, cool and heavy, in my hands. The key wasn't hard to find. It hung from the inside of his favorite cufflink case, almost as if he wanted me to stumble upon it only when the time was right. Inside were documents, recordings, and a small, leather-bound journal. Of his film Richard es un destacable neat handwriting. Asterisk, they will come for her. Asterisk, the first entry read. Asterisk, not because they loved me, but because they despise her. They cannot separate their envy of what we had from their hunger for what I built. If she ever reads this, it means my fears have proven true. Asterisk. I swallowed hard, tears welling as I flipped through more entries. He chronicled every slight from Daniel and Eleanor, every manipulative scheme, every financial scandal they had buried. But the final entries were the ones that chilled me most. Asterisk, if they cross the line from greed to malice, the clause will no longer be enough. She will need to know the whole truth. About our parents. About the inheritance before mine. About what Daniel and Eleanor did to cover it up. Asterisk, there were pages of evidence copies of old financial records. Correspondance, il va pas long gun. Richard hadn't just protected me. He had preserved their sins in ink and paper, waiting for the moment when exposure would end them forever. I pressed my palms flat against the journal. My husband hadn't trusted the law alone. He had built a second trap one, rooted in shame and ruin rather than forfeiture. The question was, should I use it? The answer came quicker than I expected. 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of shattering glass. My heart lurched as the alarm blared, the cameras lighting up on the monitor beside my bed. Two masked figures scrambled through the conservatory, clumsy and desperate. My blood went cold. I knew those gates. Eleanor's slim frame, Daniel's bull-like shoulders. I grabbed the phone to call the security company, but before I could finish dialing, Richard's pre-recorded system triggered again. This time, instead of a siren, the intruders were met with a calm, chilling message. Breaking and entering is a crime. Evidence is being recorded and will be submitted to authorities. Your names are already known. They froze, their eyes wide as the camera zeroed in. The lights flared brighter, the shutters locked automatically. And I realized Richard S. paranoia had been even greater than I knew. He had turned the estate itself into a fortress. They tried to flee, but the police sirens were already echoing down the road. By the time Daniel and Eleanor made it back to the broken conservatory door, officers were there, guns drawn. I watched from the top of the staircase as they were dragged out in handcuffs, screaming at me, "You witch! You don't deserve it." Daniel had his rage. Eleanor's voice cracked as she spat. "This isn't over. It will never be over." But as the patrol cars carried them away, I finally let my breath go. For the first time in months, I felt something dangerously close to peace. It's the next day, Ms. Patel fixash, she dropped a file to the dining table. Breaking and entering, vandalism, trespassing, it's enough to put them behind bars for years. But her voice trailed. "But what?" I asked. She tapped the file. "They're going to claim you set them up. That Richard orchestrated everything to entrap them. They'll say the sanity clause wasn't about fairness, it was about obsession, control. They'll try to turn this into a story of your husband's madness instead of their greed." I stared at the file, my hand still resting on Richard's journal, in my lap. Then maybe it's time I show the world what he left me. Not just money, not just the clause. The truth about them. Her eyes narrowed. If you go public with what's in that journal, it won't just end them financially, it will destroy them. Are you ready for that kind of war? I closed my eyes and heard Richard's voice in my memory, soft and certain. Asterisk, greed blinds them. But truth burns them. Asterisk, when I opened my eyes again, I knew my answer. Yes, I whispered. "It's time," and as the words left my mouth, a strange calm settled over me. Because I realized Richard hadn't just left me an estate. He had left me the match to set their whole rotten empire on fire. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of the dining room, gilding the edges of Richard's journal as I laid it open across the table. Each page was a fuse, waiting for the spark of daylight to ignite it. My hands traced over the entries again, not as a grieving widow this time, but as a strategist preparing for battle. Ms. Patel sat across from me, her expression unreadable. "If you release this, there's no going back. Their names, their reputations, they'll be radioactive. They tried to destroy me," I said quietly. "They broke into my home. They've stalked, harassed, slandered. If I stay silent, they'll never stop." Richard knew that. That's why he left this for me. She studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then we do it cleanly. No leaks, no tabloids. We'll file an official countersuit, attach these records, and let the court unseal them. That way, it's not you throwing mud, it's the truth under oath." I pressed my lips together. The thought of dragging this further into court made me weary to my bones. But then I remembered the look on Daniel S.'s face as he was shoved into the back of that squad car, the venom in Eleanor's voice as she hissed that it would never be over. "Do it," I whispered. The next weeks unfolded like a chess match played in slow motion. Ms. Patel filed the suit, Asterisk Patel v. Ashford siblings. Asterisk citing defamation, harassment, and criminal intent, with Richard's journal and documents submitted as key evidence. Once the court unsealed them, reporters swarmed like vultures, headlines screaming from every corner. Asterisk wealthy heirs accused of decades of fraud, asterisk family, fortune built on lies. Asterisk clauses vidostrakes has everywhere on television. In glossy magazines, in online forums where strangers debated whether I was a mastermind or a martyr. The siblings' past, which they had worked so carefully to bury, was now laid bare. Debts hidden in shell companies, forged signatures. Shady dealings with trust funds that should have supported charities instead of fueling their gambling habits. Daniel tried to fight back, staging an interview on a local network. He sat there, tie askew, sweat glistening on his forehead. "She's twisting everything," he snarled at the camera. My brother he was unstable, obsessed. He wrote things that weren't true, and now she's weaponizing them. It's all lies. But the evidence didn't lie. The letters weren't fabricated. The bank records weren't forged. Eleanor stayed quieter, but when she finally spoke, her words were venomous enough to sting. She stole him from us. She told a gossip magazine Erfa's half-shadowed in the photo they ran. She took our brother's mind, then his fortune. And now she wants to salt the earth where our family stood. Salt the earth. That phrase stuck with me. I thought of Richard's journal again. The way he had written about them. Asterisk, they cannot separate their envy of what we had from their hunger for what I built. Asterisk. The trial dragged on for months, but the tide was never in their favor. Every attempt to discredit the evidence collapsed under scrutiny. Every witness they summoned either crumbled or betrayed them. When Ms. Patel read aloud one of Richard's final letters to the court, I felt the weight of his voice settle like a mantle over the room. Asterisk, if you are reading this, it means they have chosen destruction over grace. I can no longer protect her with my life, but I can protect her with the truth. Let it stand in my stead. Asterisk. The courtroom was silent except for Eleanor's muffled sob and Daniel's knuckles cracking as he clenched his fists. The verdict came down like a hammer. Not only were they found guilty of harassment and malicious litigation, but the court ordered restitution millions. They didn't have to cover damages, legal fees, and penalties tied to their financial misdeeds. Their estates, their assets, even their cars were seized. What little remained of their standing in society crumbled overnight. I should have felt triumphant. And in some ways, I did. But as I stood once more in the marble foyer of my home, victory tasted bittersweet. Richard had won. Yes, through me, through his planning, through the clause and the journal. But what had I lost in the process? Friends, peace, the last shreds of privacy. One evening, as I poured myself a glass of wine, I caught sight of movement again in the garden. My heart leapt, but when I turned to the monitor, it wasn't Daniel or Eleanor. It was a young woman I didn't recognize standing at the gate, clutching a letter in her hands. I went to the intercom. "Who are you?" Her voice trembled, but there was conviction in it. "My name is Clara. I think I'm your husband's niece." The wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. "What did you say?" She lifted the letter, pressing it against the camera. I recognized the handwriting instantly. "Richards, he wrote to me," she said. "He told me that when the time came, I should find you, that you would explain everything." My blood ran cold. Richard had prepared for Daniel and Eleanor. He had prepared for war. But had he also left behind another secret? One last move in the game he had been playing long before he died. And if so, what role was I meant to play now? I stared at the grainy image of the girl on the monitor, her hair swept back, her eyes too much like Richard's to ignore. My hands shook as I pressed the intercom again. "Come to the side gate," I said, my voice steady though my pulse thundered. "I'll let you in." When she stepped into the foyer, the air shifted. She was young now, more than 25, with a nervous grace that reminded me of myself when I first met Richard. She clutched the letter like a lifeline, her knuckles white. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," she said softly. "But I didn't know where else to go. My father never wanted me to contact you, but when I saw the news, I thought maybe now." "Your father?" I asked, my throat tightening. She looked at the floor. "Daniel, he's my father." The room tilted. The enormity of it crashed over me like a wave. Daniel had a daughter, a niece of mine by marriage, hidden from the public eye. And Richard had known. "Let me see the letter," I said quietly. Her hands trembled as she passed it to me. The paper was old, the ink slightly faded, but the words were unmistakably his. Asterisk Clara, if you're reading this, it means the truth about your father and Aunt has begun to surface. You may not know the full story, but you have always been different. You were the one bright thing in a dark lineage. If you wish to build a life free of their shadows, seek out my wife. She will understand. She will protect you. Asterisk tears blurred my vision. Richard hadn't he just planned? For his enemies he deplanned. For the innocents caught in their orbit. I led Clara into the sitting room, poured her tea, and tried to steady my hands. How much do you know? Première asquette. Not everything, she admitted. Only that my father and had always hated you, and that they were involved in things they never wanted me to see. I tried to stay out of it, but after the arrests, people started talking. And then I found more letters hidden in my father's study. Letters from your husband to me. I didn't even know he knew I existed. I sat back, studying her. She was nervous but not manipulative. Her eyes were clear. If this was a ploy, it was a convincing one, but something in my gut told me it wasn't. Why now? I asked softly, why come here now? She swallowed. Because I'm scared. My father, he's not going to stay in prison forever. And when he gets out, he'll blame me. He'll blame you. He'll blame everyone but himself. I think Richard knew that. That's why he left this for me. For us. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small USB drive. He left this, too. Said it was only to be opened if things got bad enough. I think they're bad enough. The room went still. I plugged the drive into my laptop and a single folder appeared on the screen. Inside were audio files, dated years apart. I clicked one at random and Richard's voice filled the room, warm but heavy, with purpose. Asterisk, if you're hearing this, it means my first trap wasn't enough. It means Daniel and Eleanor's greed has turned into something darker. This drive contains everything: recordings, confessions, hidden accounts, even a map of assets they've concealed overseas. Use it. End this. Don't let them rebuild what I've dismantled. Asterisk Clara looked at me with wide eyes. I didn't listen to any of them. I thought you'd know what to do. I sat there, staring at the screen, my hands poised above the keyboard, but unwilling to move. This wasn't just about defense anymore. This was a weapon. A way to not only protect myself, but to obliterate whatever remnants of their empire still lurked in the shadows. You understand what this means? I asked her. She nodded slowly. It means we can stop them, really stop them. My father, my aunt. They'll never stop otherwise. For a long moment, I was silent. Then I reached out and took her hand across the table. You're not like them, I said softly. Richard saw that. He trusted you. And if he trusted you, so do I. She squeezed my hand, her eyes brimming with tears. What do we do now? She whispered. I looked back at the screen, at the files like dormant bombs waiting to be triggered, and then at the girl, who had come to me as both a warning and an offering of hope. Now, I said quietly, we finished what Richard started. We burned the last of their lies to the ground, somewhere deep inside me. The part of me that had been frightened for so long began to shift. No entourage, but it is because for the first time since Richard's death, I wasn't alone. And in that moment, I realized Richard's true genius wasn't the claws or the traps or even the evidence. It was this creating a bridge to someone who could stand beside me when the storm came back. Clara took a shaky breath. He really thought of everything, didn't he? Smalty, Dougie didn't he quite? Almost everything. The rest is up to us. The cursor on the screen blinked like a heartbeat, waiting. The files sat there, silent but pulsing with power. And as Clara and I leaned in together, the faintest tremor of a plan began to form, one that would not only protect us, but finally end the war Richard had known was coming. Because the Sanity clause had been only the opening move. This was the checkmate. The first file we played was dated nearly 15 years ago. Richard's voice came through clear, firm, with that faint wryness he always carried, even when speaking of serious matters. Asterisk Daniel thinks he's clever, but clever men don't leave paper trails. I've followed his shell accounts through Singapore and Panama. Eleanor has her claws in them too, of course. They've siphoned millions, some from our parents' trust, some from charities meant to fund hospitals. I've documented everything. If this ever sees daylight, it will not just ruin them, it will bury them. Asterisk Clara's eyes widened. Hospitals. I nodded grimly. Our foundation was supposed to fund children's cancer wards. He told me once some of the grants kept getting delayed, I thought it was bureaucracy. But no, it was them. One by one, we listened. There were recordings of hushed conversations. Richard had captured Daniel's slurred boasts in a bar. Eleanor's clipped tones over the phone, discussing offshore transfers. There were scanned receipts, falsified invoices, copies of signatures I recognized instantly as forged. Each file layered a story darker than the last. "This is dynamite," I whispered, my hands trembling. Clara sat back, pale. "If we release this, they won't just lose money. They'll lose everything. Friends, connections, freedom." "Good," I said sharply, the steel in my voice surprising even me. "They've stolen too much, hurt too many." It ends here, but Ms. Patel, ever cautious, had reservations when I showed her the drive. She skimmed the files, her brow furrowing deeper with every click. "This isn't just enough to win lawsuits," she said finally. "This is criminal. If we hand this to the authorities, Daniel and Eleanor could spend the rest of their lives in prison." Clara looked down at her hands. "They're still my family," she whispered. Première fait le tapong. She was caught between blood and survival, between loyalty to a name and the truth of who those people really were. I touched her shoulder gently. Family isn't always about blood. Richard knew that. That's why he chose you. Ms. Patel leaned forward. "There's another risk. Once this evidence is public, they'll know Richard gathered it years ago. They'll argue entrapment. They'll say he was obsessed, paranoid, unstable. That he set them up because he hated them. Let them try," I said coldly. The truth doesn't care about their excuses. Still, that night, alone in the quiet of the estate, doubt crept in. What if unleashing this scorched more than just them? What if it pulled Clara down too? What if Richard's foresight, brilliant as it was, left me holding a weapon that could blow up in my own hands? Si financé, found Anna this time. Richard sat at his desk, thinner than I remembered him, illness beginning to hollow his cheeks, but his eyes still burning bright. "Asterisk, darling," he said, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this, it means they've pushed you to the edge. I want you to remember, you don't owe them mercy. Mercy is for those who show regret. They never will. This isn't vengeance. This is preservation. For you. For the life we built. For the people they've harmed beyond our walls. If you hesitate, think of the children in those hospitals who went without care because Daniel wanted another yacht. Think of the communities Eleanor drained to fund her vanity projects. Then do what must be done." Asterisk, I couldn't hold back the tears. His voice, his certainty, his faith in me, it reignited something inside. The next morning, I called Ms. Patel. "We give it to the prosecutors. All of it, no half measures." She exhaled slowly. "That's a declaration of war. Then so be it." The fallout was swift. Investigators descended on Daniel and Eleanor's remaining properties. Bank accounts, assets, CZ. The press feasted on every sordid detail: the yachts, the offshore accounts, the luxury purchases funded by stolen charity funds. Daniel exploded first, ranting to every camera shoved in his face. It's her, the widow. She forged it all. My brother was insane, and now she's continuing his madness. Eleanor, ever the coldest serpent, tried silence at first. But as the indictments mounted, she broke. A leaked recording caught her screaming at her lawyer. Asterisk, tell them it was Daniel. Tell them I was forced. I won't go down for his stupidity. And just like that, the siblings turned on each other. Clara and I watched the news together, the glow of the screen reflecting off her damp cheeks. "It's over," she whispered. "It has to be over now." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to. But as I sat there in the marble foyer of my home, the faint echo of Richard S. warning pulsed in my mind. Asterisk, they will choose destruction over grace. He had been right every step of the way. And though Daniel and Eleanor were collapsing in flames of their own making, something told me the storm wasn't finished, not yet. Because desperate people don't just fight. Desperate people asterisk plot asterisk, and in the hollow quiet of the estate that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that one final trap Richard hadn't foreseen was already being laid. Zurich at dawn was a hush of stone and pale light. The air had a clean, indifferent quality everything. There smelled of order. At the bank in Old. Imposing building with granite, steps and brass letters, we were met by a man whose eyes were polite and professional and utterly unreadable. Name? He asked. I handed over Richard's will, the letter, the safe code written on a business card in a cramped hand he would never again use. The clerk examined the documents, called a supervisor, and 3 sets of formalities and signatures later, a key clinked against my palm. Box 317, the man said, and led us down a corridor that smelled faintly of metal and old paper. The vault door swung open with a patient, mechanical sigh. Box 317 was a neat, unremarkable drawer. The lock resisted a fraction, then yielded. Inside, cushioned in blue velvet, lay a small, leather packet and an object the size of my palm, wrapped in oilcloth. My heart kicked hard enough that I thought I might hear it in my ears. I untied the packet first. Inside were photographs, Daniel and Eleanor at different charity galas. Shaking hands with men I recognized from news clips, philanthropists, a politician known for his quiet donations, a CEO whose foundation often partnered with ours. Beneath the pictures were receipts, wire transfers, a list of shell companies with addresses in 12 countries. There were bank account numbers, there were names. Clara made a sound, half gasp, half sob. This is more than just them, she breathed. They had help. Ms. Patel folded the photographs like prayer and set them gently on her knee. These names are leverage, but leverage is a double-edged sword, she said. If we weaponize this recklessly, we could drag down people who were complicit but coerced, or who paid hush money and may be willing to cooperate. We need a strategy. I reached for the wrapped object. It was heavier than I expected. The oilcloth unfolded to reveal a small metal cylinder, about the length of a thumb, its surface engraved with a sequence of letters and numbers. Attached to it was a handwritten note in Richard's hand, asterisk for the last move. A key to transfer the remaining trust to the foundation and dissolve heirs' claims irrevocably. Use only if the legal path fails and they refuse to accept any settlement that protects the charities and the innocent. This is the final guardrail. It cannot be undone. Asterisk, my fingers went numb. The gravity of the thing was brutal. In its clarity, a mechanism to sever their legal tether to the estate and irreversible transfer. The phrasing mattered. Transfer the remaining trust could mean a legal instrument that, when executed with the cylinder, and appropriate signatures, triggered a clause in offshore trusts Richard had ceded years ago. It would obliterate any chance of Daniel and Eleanor ever regaining financial foothold. It would also as misreversible. Can it be executed here? Clara asked. Ms. Patel turned the cylinder over in her hand. We'll need to consult Swiss counsel. If it is what I suspect, an engraved key to a legacy instrument, it may require notification to trustees and satisfaction of certain legal preconditions. But the intent is clear. Richard wanted a final legal firebreak, and if we don't use it, I asked, though I already knew the answer. If we didn't, the network behind them might rebuild. The people implicated by the ledger could buy their way back into respectability. The children's wards might stay unfunded. The charity hospitals might remain shuttered. We brought the contents back to the hotel and set them on the table, like relics. Papers, photos, the cylinder. We did not sleep. Instead, we planned, called, and conferred with Swiss attorneys Ms. Patel had on speed dial. The legal path was patient and methodical. The cylinder was blunt and immediate. The prosecutors in 3 countries would take time. The courts would drag. In that same time, all eyes could scramble, evidence could disappear, witnesses could be bought or silenced. Richard wanted an end, I said quietly, mostly to myself. Not a slow bleed. Clara's hand found mine. What do you want? The question opened something in me that had been closed and hard. For months the part of myself Richard had seen and believed in. I could use the legal channels and risk them circling back like wolves. Or I could execute his final measure and end it decisively, burn the bridges they would use to come back. Ms. Patel, who rarely let emotion creep into her counsel, surprised me. There is a middle path, she said. We give the evidence to multiple authorities at once, U.S. prosecutors, Swiss Financial Crimes Unit, and the charities they victimized. We secure public injunctions and freeze orders. At the same time, we prepare the cylinder as leverage. If anyone tries to obstruct justice, if they attempt to flee or tamper, the cylinder goes to the trustee and the transfer becomes automatic. It's not vengeance, it's insurance legal, contingent. But real. I stared at the cylinder, the weight of it reflected in Miss Patel's steady reasoning. Assurance. That's what Richard had wanted, an option to trigger only if the law failed him. We do that, I said. We use the law first, loudly and publicly. We file everywhere. We make sure the net is so wide that there is nowhere to hide. And if, in the end, the net fails, then the cylinder executes the final safeguard. She nodded. It gives us moral high ground and a plan for every contingency. We left Zurich with more than we had come for. Evidence, counsel, and a choice that sat like a coiled animal in my chest. Back home, the world was abuzz of new trials and new headlines. The list of implicated names sent tremors through boardrooms and elected offices. Some of the people named cut deals. Others fought like cornered beasts. The Allied network shrank, then splintered. A senator announced his resignation amid whispers. A charity director was suspended. An offshore shell manager vanished with bank accounts frozen. For a while, it seemed like the legal path was vindicating Richard's faith in institutions slow, clumsy, but inexorable. The courts handed down indictments. The press lined up to tell the story. Daniel and Eleanor, already stripped of their immediate power, began to fracture publicly. Friends abandoned them. Their allies turned cautious. We watched the crumbling with an exhausted, wary satisfaction. But then the phone calls started, again this time, not threats but offers. Men with clean suits and softer voices called on behalf of named parties, offering off-the-record settlements, quiet donations to the foundation in exchange for silence. They wanted to bury the ledger under goodwill. The phone rang just after midnight. Not the landline, not my cell, an old rotary phone in Richard's study that hadn't he rung once since his death. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. My heart froze, and for a moment I just stood there in the darkened hall, staring at the study door. The phone rang again and again. Finally, with trembling hands, I lifted the receiver. Hello? At first, only static. Then a low voice, distorted, almost unrecognizable. You should have left well enough alone. The line went dead. I sank into Richard's leather chair, the receiver still clutched in my hand. Mi mara se Daniel on the house arrest pending trial. They shouldn't have access to me. But the tone, the menace it carried, their venom. If not them directly, then someone working for them. The next day, Miss Patel, her briefcase brimming lillings. But when I told her about the call, her expression shifted from concern to something darker. They still have allies, she said. Old partners, friends who benefited from their thefts. If the siblings go down, those people might go down with them. They have every reason to silence you before you can testify. Silence me, I asked, my voice tight. She didn't flinch. Yes, that night, I doubled the guards at the gates. Clara stayed in the estate with me, though I saw the fear in her eyes every time the lights flickered or a branch tapped against the windows. She tried to be brave, but she was young, and she had grown up in the shadow of people who thrived on fear. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she turned to me. Do you think Richard knew this would happen, that it would get this bad? I stared into the flames, the crackle and pop of burning wood reminding me of gunfire. He knew them, I said softly. He knew their greed, but hatred festers. I don't think even he could have imagined how deep it ran. She was quiet a long moment, then whispered, maybe that's why he chose me. Not just to help you, but to stop them once and for all. Her words lingered in my mind long after she went to bed. 2 weeks later, just before dawn, the first attempt came. The security cameras caught a van idling down the road, lights off, figures slipping out into the shadows. The guards moved fast, but the intruders were fast to spray paint on the cameras. Cuts in the fence, a small fire set at the edge of the gardens. By the time the police arrived, the figures were gone, leaving behind only smoke and ash. On the gate, scrawled in black paint, asterisk asterisk sanity won't save you. Asterisk asterisk Clara stood beside me as I read it, her fists clenched. It's them. Even behind bars, it's them. They're desperate, I said, though my voice wavered. Desperation makes mistakes. And Mistakes can be used against them, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing dread inside me. Richard had foreseen so much, but he wasn't here now. The recordings, the journals, the evidence they were shields, yes. But shields don't stop shadows creeping in the night. That evening, as I walked through the quiet halls of the estate, I stopped in front of Richard's portrait. His painted eyes seemed to follow me, steady and sure. You always planned ahead, I whispered. Tell me you planned for this too. Tell me you didn't leave me alone at the end. And then I noticed something I had never seen before. A slight unevenness in the frame, as though the portrait had been hung to conceal something. With shaking hands, I lifted it from the wall. Behind it, a small safe was embedded in the plaster. The lock was old-fashioned, but I knew the code before I even touched it. Richard's birthday. The date that had anchored our lives. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with time. My name was scrawled across to the grand hand. Première torito pen my brain throat. Asterisk clause of the clause of Thank note left one final measure. In the event they come for your life instead of your name, go to the bank in Zurich. Box number 317. Inside is the only key left to end this completely. Use it only when you are certain the war cannot be won in any other way. Trust Clara. She will stand with you. Asterisk, I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling down my face. Richard hadn't just left traps. He'd left an ending. A final card to play, but what waited in that box? What could possibly end a war that had already consumed everything? And could I bring myself to use it knowing that once I did, there would be no turning back? I folded Richard's letter into my palm until the paper softened. Then Reithig, Box 317 a final measure. Use only when the war cannot be won any other way. How long until you can get us a flight? Clara asked, voice barely more than a whisper as she stood in the doorway, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. I looked at the portrait of Richard on the wall and felt an odd tenderness for the man who had planned his death like a general planning a siege. Tonight, if we must, I said. The words surprised me with their calm. But not alone. Clara's mouth formed a soft no. Monsieur Patel. She's already on it, I said. She come with us. If Richard meant for this to be used only in extremis, we need counsel at hand to make sure we don't pull the wrong trigger. Miss Patel arrived within the hour. Briefcase in hand, and exhaustion electric at the edges of her voice. She read the letter in silence, then closed her eyes briefly, as if to ward off a headache. You understand what this might be, she said finally. Swiss safe deposit boxes are notoriously opaque. If Richard laid the gear en instrument, a wire something that either dismantles the last of their empire or implicates people we then never considered players. Either way, this is delicate, then we don't announce it, I said. We go quietly. We retrieve the box, we bring whatever's inside back to council, and then we decide. Her glance softened. You're sure? I held up the letter. He told me to trust you, Miss Patel. He told Clara to seek me. That's enough. We flew out that night, the city lights receding beneath us like pins on a map. Clara slept fitfully against the window. Fingers clutched around a paper cup of tea. Miss Patel reviewed documents under the harsh cabin light, lips moving silently as she rehearsed lines and contingencies. I watched them both and felt the enormity of the moment compress into the small metal box of my flight bracelet. The phone rang just after midnight. Not the landline, not my cell, an old rotary phone in Richard's study that hadn't rung once since his death. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. My heart froze, and for a moment I just stood there in the darkened hall, staring at the study door. The phone rang again and again. Finally, with trembling hands, I lifted the receiver. Hello? At first, only static. Then a low voice, distorted, almost unrecognizable. You should have left well enough alone. The line went dead. I sank into Richard's leather chair, the receiver still clutched in my hand. Mi mara se danyo on the house arrest pending trial. They shouldn't have access to me. But the tone, the menace it carried their venom. If not them directly, then someone working for them. The next day, Miss Patel, her briefcase brimming lillings. But when I told her about the call, her expression shifted from concern to something darker. They still have our lives, she said. Old partners, friends who benefited from their thefts. If the siblings go down, those people might go down with them. They have every reason to silence you before you can testify. Silence me, I asked, my voice tight. She didn't flinch. Yes, that night, I doubled the guards at the gates. Clara stayed in the estate with me, though I saw the fear in her eyes every time the lights flickered or a branch tapped against the windows. She tried to be brave, but she was young, and she had grown up in the shadow of people who thrived on fear. One evening, as we sat by the fire, she turned to me. Do you think Richard knew this would happen, that it would get this bad? I stared into the flames. The crackle and pop of burning would reminding me of gunfire. He knew them, I said softly. He knew their greed, but hatred festers. I don't think even he could have imagined how deep it ran. She was quiet a long moment, then whispered, maybe that's why he chose me. Not just to help you, but to stop them once and for all. Her words lingered in my mind long after she went to bed. 2 weeks later, just before dawn, the first attempt came. The security cameras caught a van idling down the road, lights off, figures slipping out into the shadows. The guards moved fast, but the intruders were fast to spray paint on the cameras. Cuts in the fence, a small fire set at the edge of the gardens. By the time the police arrived, the figures were gone, leaving behind only smoke and ash. On the gate, scrawled in black paint, *** sanity won't save you. *** Clara stood beside me as I read it, her fists clenched. It's them. Even behind bars, it's them. They're desperate, I said, though my voice wavered. Desperation makes mistakes. And mistakes can be used against them, but I couldn't ignore the gnawing dread inside me. Richard had foreseen so much, but he wasn't here now. The recordings, the journals, the evidence, they were shields, yes. But shields don't stop shadows creeping in the night. That evening, as I walked through the quiet halls of the estate, I stopped in front of Richard's portrait. His painted eyes seemed to follow me, steady and sure. You always planned ahead, I whispered. Tell me you planned for this too. Tell me you didn't leave me alone at the end. And then I noticed something I had never seen before. A slight unevenness in the frame, as though the portrait had been hung to conceal something. With shaking hands, I lifted it from the wall. Behind it, a small safe was embedded in the plaster. The lock was old-fashioned, but I knew the code before I even touched it. Richard's birthday. The date that had anchored our lives. The safe clicked open. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with time. My name was scrawled across to the grand hand. Première torito penned my brain throat. * clause of the clause of Thank note left one final measure. In the event they come for your life instead of your name, go to the bank in Zurich. Box number 317. Inside is the only key left to end this completely. Use it only when you are certain the war cannot be won in any other way. Trust Clara. She will stand with you. * I pressed the letter to my chest, tears spilling down my face. Richard hadn't just left traps. He'd left an ending. A final card to play, but what waited in that box? What could possibly end a war that had already consumed everything? And could I bring myself to use it knowing that once I did, there would be no turning back? I folded Richard's letter into my palm until the paper softened. Then Reithik, box 317 a final measure. Use only when the war cannot be won any other way. How long until you can get us a flight? Clara asked, voice barely more than a whisper as she stood in the doorway, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. I looked at the portrait of Richard on the wall and felt an odd tenderness for the man who had planned his death like a general planning a siege. Tonight, if we must, I said. The words surprised me with their calm. But not alone. Clara's mouth formed a soft no. Misiège pateo. She's already on it, I said. She come with us. If Richard meant for this to be used only in extremis, we need counsel at hand to make sure we don't pull the wrong trigger. Miss Patel arrived within the hour. Briefcase in hand and exhaustion electric at the edges of her voice. She read the letter in silence, then closed her eyes briefly as if to ward off a headache. You understand what this might be, she said finally. Swiss safe deposit boxes are notoriously opaque. If Richard laid the gear en instrument, a wire something that either dismantles the last of their empire or implicates people we then never considered players. Either way, this is delicate, then we don't announce it, I said. We go quietly. We retrieve the box, we bring whatever's inside back to council, and then we decide. Her glance softened. You're sure? I held up the letter. He told me to trust you. Ms. Patel, he told Clara to seek me. That's enough. We flew out that night, the city lights receding beneath us like pins on a map. Clara slept fitfully against the window. Fingers clutched around a paper cup of tea. Miss Patel reviewed documents under the harsh cabin light, lips moving silently as she rehearsed lines and contingencies. I watched them both and felt the enormity of the moment compress into the small metal box of my flight bracelet. For a while, it seemed like the legal path was vindicating Richard's faith in institutions, slow, clumsy, but inexorable. The courts handed down indictments. The press lined up to tell the story. Daniel and Eleanor, already stripped of their immediate power, began to fracture publicly. Friends abandoned them. Their allies turned cautious. We watched the crumbling with an exhausted, wary satisfaction. But then the phone calls started. Again this time, not threats but offers. Men with clean suits and softer voices called on behalf of named parties, offering off-the-record settlements, quiet donations to the foundation in exchange for silence. They wanted to bury the ledger under goodwill. It was the precise thing Miss Patel had warned about: slow, legal capture by influence. The law was working, but the law could be mollified by wealth and reputation. One evening, as the sunset bled over the estate, Clara and I sat in the study and listened to a recorded message left on our secure line. The voice was modulated, but the tone was unmistakable, conciliatory, regretful, not the bluster of a man who would take responsibility, but the bargaining of those who wanted to keep what they could. You have to understand, the message said, nobody wants a spectacle. We can make this right. Place a call. We can arrange for charity funds larger than any compensation, and we can help rehabilitate them. Quietly, Clara's knuckles went white on the arm of her chair. They'll buy it, she whispered. They'll buy everything. I thought of the children Richard had written about, hospital wards that had received nothing while yachts glided across oceans. I thought of the faces in those grainy photos. I thought of the cylinder tucked away in a Swiss vault that would perform his last will like a machine. I stood, muscles stiff with a sudden clarity that felt like a blade of winter air. No, my voice was low and sure. We close this by truth. We let the law run its course openly. We refuse to make peace with those who built their lives on other people's suffering. If anyone thinks they can exchange silence for salvation, they can go to the courts like the rest of us. Clara looked at me, fear and pride flickering together. If someone pays, if they bribe, what then? We use the cylinder. It remains as insurance. I said, use it only if the system fails those who depend on it. That was his instruction. That is our oath. The weeks that followed tightened like a noose around the remaining collaborators. Several men who had called with honeyed offers were subpoenaed. Wilson and Harrow, a consulting firm that had laundered funds through charitable channels, found itself under investigation. Friends of the siblings turned into witnesses. And yet in the dark, beneath the shape of the law, I knew the cylinder waited, a last act, a final ledger, the end of an era. Richard had given me a terrible power and made me custodian of a moral problem. When does preservation become punishment? When does justice become obliteration? I held to his words, use it only when other paths have been exhausted, but each name that came forward in the indictments narrowed the space in which restraint felt possible. Each time a journalist asked if we would use every tool available. I thought of the metal cylinder in Zurich, gleaming with a quiet inevitability. One rainy afternoon, as I watched the lawyers argue in a courtroom window, reflected in the puddles, my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed a name I did not recognize. I frowned, heart stuttering. Hello. A woman's voice, younger than I expected, trembled. Mrs. Ashford? My name is Naomi. I worked at the charity before. The donations stopped. I think I have something you need to hear. I felt the old pulse, danger, or salvation, or both rise like a tide. Come to my office, I said. Bring whatever you have. The war, it seemed, was not yet ready to be finished. But, for the first time in months, I felt the absence of aimless fear. The map was clearer now. The moves were in the light. Whatever came next, we would meet it had the law and the last key at our side. The envelope felt heavier than its paperweight should have allowed. I broke the seal with trembling fingers and unfolded the single sheet inside. Asterisk, darling, if this finds you, then you have reached the edge of the board. I know you are tired. I know you want peace. But remember this, the claws, the evidence, the cylinder, they were never the point. You were. I trusted you to decide, not just to defend. My last gift to you is not the estate, nor the trap, nor the war. It is freedom. Do not let them chain you to revenge. Choose life, choose love. And then let go. Asterisk. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. For so long I had been carrying Richard's strategies like commandments carved in stone, believing my only role was to enact what he had left behind. But here, in his final letter, was permission not to destroy, not to preserve, but to asterisk decide asterisk. I walked back into the courtroom with the envelope folded neatly in my hand. When the judge reconvened, the trustees sat rigid, the lawyers bristling. Daniel and Eleanor staring like wolves cornered by fire. I have the power to end this with one instrument, I told the court, my voice steady, though my heart thundered. But I will not. Not because they deserve mercy, but because the law deserves the chance to finish what it has begun. The cylinder will remain sealed unless further violence is attempted. Let this be the final warning. The room was electric. Some looked relieved, others furious. Daniel's lips curled in a snarl, Eleanor's hands clenched white in her lap. But the judge nodded, and so did the prosecutors. The law would carry the rest. Weeks turned 2 months. The trials concluded, verdicts rendered. Daniel and Eleanor were sentenced to decades in prison, not for inheritance, squabbles, but for conspiracy, fraud, and the lives stolen by their greed. Their allies scattered, reputations ruined. The charities received emergency funding, then permanent restitution through court orders. Naomi testified bravely, then disappeared into a quiet life under protection. And me? I stayed in the estate a while longer, until the echoes of sirens and whispered threats finally dulled. The marble foyer felt less like a fortress and more like a tomb. One morning, I handed the keys to the foundation's board, turning the house into a public space for education and charity events. Richard's walls would not echo only with walls, they would shelter new beginnings. Clara and I left together, not as fugitives but as survivors. We started small, a modest apartment, a calendar of hospital visits, a fund dedicated to the children who had suffered most. For the first time since Richard's death, my days were not measured in battles won, but in lives touched. The cylindric and in trost dimmi. I pray it never needs to be touched again. Sometimes, at night, I dream of Richard. He stands in the marble foyer, smiling, his hand outstretched. And when I reach for him, he doesn't lead me into battle, but into sunlight. Because in the end, his sanity clause wasn't just a trap for the greedy. It was a lesson for me that sanity means knowing when to fight and when to lay your weapons down. And at last, I chose peace.